signature event that is taking place here. And this is the launch of the African Economic Outlook. My name is Daniel Makokera. I'll be the moderator for this afternoon. Now, just to give you house rules, how this is going to work, we will have speakers who will be here, and because I see we have a full house, and we want to make sure that this is as interactive as possible. So we want to make sure that you get to speak and we get to interact with those who are on the podium. So we'll have speakers and a guest speaker, and we'll have presentations that will take place here. But after that, please get ready with interactive ideas, whether they are questions, whether they are points you want to put forward. But I think let's try and be, because we are so many, let's try and be to the point, succinct, direct questions. If we want to direct questions to those, to a particular panelist that has said what you might be interested in. So let's not also have 3 questions in one breath. So I'll ask a question, and my second one is this, my third one is this. I'll be honest with you, I'll be so dictatorial and ask you to stop at the first question. So let's agree on that. There are some reports, copies of the report that are on the table. But right now, I think they're not many, but we do have also memory sticks, like the one on my pocket here, that will be distributed. Lots of space there, but you can download also from the website. So that's the way things are going to be. So without further ado, may I call the president of the African Development Bank Group to give us his remarks. Sir.
Thank you, Daniel. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the land of 1,000 hills. Actually, I'm sure there are more than 1,000 hills. I'm happy to see so many old friends here. I'm sure I'll have time to catch up on a few things. Now, I've been counting the number of meetings about Africa, on Africa, Africa Rising, and I've stopped counting. I think it is time that we begin to have meetings and sessions that don't simply give us their diagnosis. I think we can all agree on the diagnosis. We need now to agree where is the medicine, how will it be taken, who will give it, and so on. I hope this session will be an opener in that direction. This report is a result of an outstanding cooperation between the African Development Bank, the OECD, and the UNDP. I want to thank you all for this great cooperation. I want to thank my good friend Pascal Lamy. Pascal, welcome, for accepting to keynote this report. I cannot think of someone more than Pascal to do this report, especially focusing on the global value chains, a subject very close to his heart. Now, 3 points, and then I'd like to give way. Each time I've heard about Africa Rising, I've also heard 3 subtitles. Whose Africa is rising? In fact, there is a story now in Senegal that you don't eat economic growth. People are asking, economies are growing, and so what? I think we need to be careful. We need to begin to answer that particular question. Number 2, the story is, but we're 54 countries. Some, South Sudan, Central African Republic, are having difficulties. So which Africa is growing? That is easier to answer. But more importantly, for a young continent like ourselves, the young people are asking, but where are the jobs? I think today, as you tackle the global value chains, you will be able to see where there are jobs. The reality of the numbers, which I'm sure you'll be discussing again, show some stark numbers. Economies are growing, but the bit of the economy is growing fastest is the service sectors. Industry, as a proportion of GDP, has declined. agriculture as a proportion of GDP has declined everywhere. Now, that is not unusual in the process of economic transformation. But now we'll have to answer the question. You have got services increasing, industry declining, agriculture declining, but is there transformation? I hope this afternoon we can tackle that. Now, the nations all over have prospered by tapping into global trade and global capital. And Africa cannot be different. So I do hope that this afternoon we can delve into these issues. We have got a great panel, a great speaker. I once again to invite you to listen to them carefully, engage with them. So welcome again to Kigali, to the new meetings. I look forward to see as many of you as possible this week. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I'm happy we started with you because the way you do set the tone is succinct to the point and you sent the message home. The President made a comment about someone saying we don't eat growth. I mean, we get to hear a lot about that as these discussions continue. How transformational is that growth and what are the indicators of, or at least the tools we can use to making sure that that growth expands. There's always this fight of access of markets by Africans on wanting to get to the countries of the North when they can't even at least trade with themselves, and I hope we will get to hear that. May you now allow me to call the panelists that will be coming here, that we will be interacting with this afternoon, and then once they are all here, we will have Mr. Pascal Lamy to give us his address. And may I start with you, Mr. Pascal Lamy? May you come up, please, sir. May we clap as they come up, please. To keep it gender balanced and being sensitive here. Ambassador Valentine Rugwabiza, Chief Executive, Rwanda Development Board. Mr. Mario Pezzini, Director, OECD Development Centre. And Angela Lusigi, Policy Advisor, Macroeconomics, Regional Bureau for Africa, UNDP. And of course, last but not least, Professor Mthuli Ncube, the Chief Economist at the African Development Bank. Mr. Lamy, sir.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames, Messieurs, un grand merci d'abord pour cette invitation à m'exprimer devant vous aujourd'hui. J'y ai été très sensible. Donald Kaberuka, comme beaucoup d'entre vous ici cet après-midi, sait que votre continent est devenu pour moi petit à petit une passion. Et vous savez combien je suis heureux de pouvoir continuer à apporter ma contribution à vos délibérations et peut-être même encore davantage depuis que j'ai recouvré ma liberté de parole. Le rapport que vous avez en main, que la Banque africaine de développement, l'OCDE et le PNUD rendent public aujourd'hui, représente à mes yeux une innovation majeure. Pour la première fois, il détaille le résultat de recherches approfondies sur les chaînes de valeur en Afrique et sur le rôle majeur qu'elles sont appelées à jouer dans le développement économique et social du continent. Et je vais consacrer mes quelques propos au contexte de ce rapport, autrement dit, aux grandes évolutions des échanges internationaux qui sont intervenus dans le monde, à la manière dont elles impactent l'avenir de la production de biens et de services sur votre continent, et enfin aux conséquences à en tirer du point de vue d'un certain nombre de politiques publiques. D'abord, les grandes tendances de la structure des échanges internationaux. Nous savons tous que l'économie mondiale a connu des transformations majeures au cours des dernières décennies, que l'on peut résumer par ce concept de globalisation. et dont tout laisse à penser qu'elles vont se poursuivre dans l'avenir. C'est l'hypothèse que fait le rapport. Je partage ce point de vue. Au plan économique, cette globalisation se traduit par deux phénomènes a priori de sens différents. Une très grande intégration des marchés d'un côté, d'autre part, une très grande fragmentation des processus de production. Cette fragmentation des processus de production, cette multilocalisation progressive de chaînes de production qui, très longtemps, étaient restées nationales ou locales, se traduit dans un chiffre simple. Il y a 20 ans, le contenu moyen en importation des exportations était de 20%. Il est aujourd'hui de 40%. Il sera dans 20 ans probablement de 60%. Simultanément, intégration de ces processus de production de plus en plus multilocalisés au sein de chaînes de production de biens, de services. Les manifestations les plus éclatantes de cette évolution se situant en Asie du Sud-Est pour l'essentiel, en Europe et en Amérique du Nord, pour autant qu'on se fie au passé. Rôle évidemment très important des multinationales qui construisent, dirigent, arbitrent ces chaînes de production, qu'elles soient dominées du côté du producteur qui cherche à rejoindre le consommateur ou qu'elles soient dominées du côté de l'acheteur qui souhaite intégrer sa chaîne en amont. Une interpénétration de plus en plus complexe et totale des biens et des services, ce qu'on appelle la servicification de ces chaînes de production, à un point tel qu'il est parfois difficile de distinguer les biens et les services comme on avait l'habitude de le faire dans le passé. Et enfin, une spécialisation des économies, certaines au cours des derniers temps s'étant clairement orientées vers la production de ressources naturelles, que ce soit le Brésil, que ce soit l'Argentine, que ce soit la Russie, d'autres en général dépourvues de ces ressources naturelles en quantité suffisante, s'orientant plutôt sur les ressources humaines. C'est le cas de la Chine, c'est le cas de l'Europe, c'est le cas de l'Inde. Et entre les deux, les États-Unis, le continent africain, des pays comme l'Indonésie ou comme l'Australie, qui peuvent, en général à juste titre, avoir pour ambition de combiner ces deux sources de croissance que sont la disposition de ressources naturelles et des ressources humaines abondantes. Enfin, pour terminer sur cette esquisse rapide de ces grandes évolutions, un changement important dans l'importance relative des obstacles aux échanges, ce qui a des conséquences, nous le verrons dans un instant, sur les questions d'ouverture commerciale. En très gros, depuis très très longtemps, depuis en gros que le premier roi de Crète a signé le premier traité de commerce avec le pharaon d'Égypte, l'ouverture des échanges, ça consistait à traiter, diminuer, éliminer des obstacles aux échanges dont l'objectif était de protéger le producteur de la concurrence étrangère. Ce monde-là est en train de se terminer et le monde des obstacles aux échanges de demain, et en grande partie déjà d'aujourd'hui, est un monde où l'essentiel des obstacles aux échanges résulte non pas tellement de mesures classiques, mais de mesures nouvelles, ce qu'on appelle les barrières non tarifaires. Le problème étant là, non plus d'éliminer ces barrières non tarifaires, personne ne va accepter de réduire à un maximum de résidus de pesticides dans des fleurs coupées pour augmenter le volume des échanges. Ce sont des questions importantes qui ont à voir avec la préservation de la santé, par exemple. Donc ce sont des mesures destinées à protéger les consommateurs et c'est la différence entre ces mesures qui fait aujourd'hui obstacle au commerce, ce qui entraîne un certain nombre de conséquences sur lesquelles je reviendrai. L'essentiel à ce stade étant de noter, comme le fait à juste titre le rapport, que la capacité à matcher ces normes et ces standards qui correspondent à des barrières non tarifaires est devenue maintenant probablement la clé d'entrée essentielle d'un producteur, d'un pays dans ces chaînes de production. On songe souvent à d'autres facteurs qui sont à juste titre mis en valeur dans le rapport, mais les standards, les normes et la capacité de les matcher devient de plus en plus un facteur essentiel de compétitivité, donc de croissance, dans cet univers de chaînes de valeur globale. Deuxième point, comment, à grands traits, ces évolutions impactent-elles spécifiquement le continent africain et son développement? Cette extension, cette prolifération, cette augmentation de ces circuits internationaux de production de biens et de services renforce certains des avantages comparatifs africains. Comme je l'ai dit il y a un instant, votre continent possède l'atout de pouvoir jouer à la fois sur les ressources naturelles, celles du sol, et sur les ressources humaines. La prolifération, l'extension de ces chaînes de valeur, à bien des égards, est une bonne nouvelle pour votre développement. Le coût d'accès au marché global est plus faible dans des processus de production qui sont segmentés qu'il ne l'était par le passé, où le coût d'accès au marché global impliquait des structures capitalistiques très intégrées du type sidérurgie, automobile, pharmacie, chimie. À partir du moment où c'est sur un de ces secteurs, de ces chaînes de production, que l'on peut développer un avantage comparatif, le ticket d'entrée au marché global en est d'autant réduit. Ça réduit donc le coût en capital de l'accès à l'échange international, ce qui est une bonne nouvelle comme l'Afrique. C'est aussi une bonne nouvelle car elle peut permettre à votre continent, qui a montré sa capacité à sauter des étapes, notamment dans le développement des technologies de l'information. Il suffit de le voir dans le pays qui nous accueille aujourd'hui, le Rwanda, la capacité de surmonter ces étapes que des processus classiques d'industrialisation ou de processus de production de biens et des services exigeaient sont aujourd'hui beaucoup plus faciles dès lors que les technologies de l'information se répandent. Ces évolutions, ces transformations de l'économie internationale impliquent aussi de porter davantage d'attention à certaines faiblesses de la croissance des pays africains en général. Je n'y reviens pas, ce sont des questions bien connues, bien identifiées. Les réseaux de transport, les réseaux d'énergie, dans certains cas, encore une fois, je le rappelle, pas au Rwanda, la difficulté avec les réseaux de technologie de l'information, et certainement, et le rapport le souligne à très juste titre, une importance croissante, je dirais même cruciale, à la qualification des ressources humaines, à la disponibilité de personnel formé, à la capacité de mettre en place des formations techniques, notamment sous forme d'apprentissage, et nous savons que c'est un secteur dans lequel il reste beaucoup à faire. Dernier point pour lequel les transformations que j'ai évoquées à grands traits impactent fortement votre continent, c'est cette observation sur le changement de la nature des obstacles à l'échange et par conséquent de la signification des processus d'ouverture des échanges. Ces évolutions signifient qu'il faut, d'une manière générale, mais surtout en Afrique, envisager les questions d'ouverture commerciale sous un angle différent, qu'il s'agisse de l'accès au marché africain par les Africains ou qu'il s'agisse de l'accès au marché des autres continents par les Africains, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, nous avons changé de monde en passant des barrières tarifaires aux barrières non tarifaires. Et ceci a des conséquences majeures, notamment parce que cela signifie la fin de la notion de préférence, qui est celle qui a fait partie de la doctrine globale, du consensus international, aussi longtemps qu'il s'agissait de favoriser le développement des échanges via la réduction des droits de douane. Si je suis les États-Unis ou l'Europe et que je souhaite favoriser les pays africains grâce à des tarifs douaniers préférentiels, je vais mettre un droit de douane zéro sur les fleurs rwandaises, je vais mettre un droit de douane supérieur sur les fleurs costaricaines et je vais mettre un droit de douane encore supérieur sur les fleurs israéliennes pour ajuster mes préférences au niveau de développement. S'il s'agit à la frontière européenne ou américaine d'administrer le contrôle d'un niveau maximum de pesticides dans les fleurs coupées qui proviennent, par exemple, du Rwanda, alors il n'y a plus de préférence possible. Les standards, les normes, c'est tout ou rien. Et il faut saisir la très grande importance de ce changement dans la conduite des politiques commerciales, dans les modalités d'ouverture de l'échange international et dans la manière dont, finalement, une convergence de ces systèmes réglementaires, de ces systèmes d'administration de la précaution se feront. Et évidemment, la grande question étant de savoir si ça se fera au niveau multilatéral ou si ça se fera au niveau bilatéral. Et ce qui est en train de se passer dans cette négociation qui a démarré l'année dernière entre l'Europe et les États-Unis, ce partenariat transatlantique et qui porte à 80% sur ces questions de convergence ou d'administration de la précaution via des règlements, aura une importance cruciale pour la suite. J'y reviendrai dans un instant. Dernier point, comment ces évolutions, ces transformations, qui ont un impact spécifique sur le continent africain, qui possède lui-même ses propres spécificités, ses propres forces, ses propres faiblesses, comment tout ceci se traduit-il dans les priorités à donner à la conduite des politiques publiques? D'abord, cela conduit à définir un objectif pour ce qui est de la croissance, qui est l'accroissement de la valeur ajoutée domestique. Chacun sait que le produit national brut est la somme des valeurs ajoutées. Il devient essentiel, dans ces conditions, d'identifier là où un pays, une région, est le mieux à même d'ajouter de la valeur dans le circuit de l'échange international. Autrement dit, l'identification précise du meilleur positionnement d'un pays ou d'une région dans ces chaînes de valeur devient un objectif stratégique essentiel, à condition, bien sûr, qu'on soit capable de le mesurer, et le rapport insiste à juste titre sur les nouvelles méthodes de mesure de la valeur ajoutée dans l'échange international que j'avais eu l'occasion, avec l'équipe qui était la mienne, et je suis sûr que Valentine Rugwabiza s'en souviendra, quand nous avons lancé, du temps où j'étais directeur général de l'OMC, cet nouveau comptage du commerce international en valeur ajoutée. Donc il devient essentiel de focaliser l'attention sur cet objectif et d'être capable de le mesurer correctement, ce qui ne va pas de soi, chaque pays devant sélectionner le secteur, le segment dans lequel il peut maximiser ses avantages comparatifs. Ces grandes évolutions et l'importance de ces nouvelles chaînes de valeur impliquent un nouveau regard sur le partenariat public-privé en matière de croissance. McKinsey, et je ne fais de publicité pour personne, a fort bien identifié ce qu'ils appellent ces deux espaces à temps différents, l'espace qui mène d'une faible rentabilité à une forte rentabilité, l'espace qui mène à une rentabilité immédiate à une rentabilité différée. Et nous savons que dans le fonctionnement de ces chaînes de valeur, il faut répartir les efforts entre les pouvoirs publics et le secteur privé étant naturellement plus attiré dans les secteurs où la rentabilité est forte et dans lesquels cette rentabilité est précoce, et le secteur public devant de son côté focaliser son attention, et notamment pour tout ce qui est des systèmes de formation, d'éducation, dans des secteurs à rentabilité relativement faible et probablement différée. Le reste étant une affaire d'environnement des affaires, nous le savons tous et je n'ai pas besoin d'y insister. Troisième leçon majeure pour ce qui est de la conduite des politiques publiques et de développement, la capacité d'identifier correctement celles des multinationales qui sont les plus actives dans le développement de ces chaînes de production mondiale, qu'il s'agisse de l'automobile, qu'il s'agisse de la chimie, de la pharmacie, de l'agroalimentaire, ou qu'il s'agisse de secteurs comme la banque et l'assurance. La capacité à dialoguer et à lire les stratégies d'établissement des chaînes de valeur de ces grandes multinationales devient beaucoup plus importante que pour le passé. Quatrième conséquence, on la connaissait depuis un certain temps, y compris dans ce monde classique de production plutôt domestique et d'obstacles aux échanges plutôt d'ordre tarifaire, c'est évidemment la nécessité de l'intégration régionale. On pense toujours, et c'est bien normal, aux infrastructures, à la facilitation des échanges sur laquelle vous reviendrez demain, à l'élimination d'obstacles de type droit de douane, mais ce que nous dit ce nouveau paysage de chaîne de valeur, c'est qu'en termes d'intégration régionale, la priorité n'est plus là où elle était il y a 30 ans, il y a 20 ans, il y a 10 ans. La priorité est à l'harmonisation des systèmes qui gouvernent les standards, les normes et les réglementations. Et l'Afrique, une fois de plus, parce qu'elle peut brûler des étapes, peut aller directement à cette étape d'intégration régionale en économisant en quelque sorte tout un tas de difficultés qui se sont posées dans le cas européen, qui se sont posées en Amérique latine ou en Amérique centrale, qui se sont posées dans des régions comme l'ASEAN, en allant le plus directement possible à l'harmonisation régionale de ces standards et de ces normes. Enfin, et j'en termine sur ce point avant de conclure, si telle est bien la priorité, si telle est bien la direction dans laquelle il faut porter le regard pour le développement de vos économies, alors la question de savoir si cette harmonisation des standards, des normes, de la précaution se fait au niveau multilatéral ou se fait au niveau bilatéral prend une importance considérable comme l'Afrique. Si on regarde l'Afrique par rapport aux autres économies de cette planète, elle a une grande particularité, c'est de dépendre très peu de régulation bilatérale en matière d'échange. Par rapport à d'autres pays, si je puis m'exprimer ainsi, c'est l'Afrique qui a le plus d'œufs dans le panier du multilatéral et donc de l'OMC. Or, ce système multilatéral, aujourd'hui, est plutôt bien dressée et assez efficace pour traiter la réduction des vieux obstacles aux échanges, des obstacles classiques du type droit de douane ou subventions qui distordent les échanges. Il n'est pas bien armé, ne serait-ce que parce qu'il n'est pas mandaté pour organiser, monitorer, surveiller des processus multilatéraux d'harmonisation, de convergence réglementaire. Et cette absence du système multilatéral sur ce terrain, qu'on est obligé de constater aujourd'hui, doit, à mon avis, faire réfléchir les leaders africains, ceux qui s'occupent des échanges, ceux qui s'occupent du développement de leur pays, et ils y passent tous l'essentiel de leur temps, pour savoir comment, de ce point de vue, les intérêts africains seront-ils les mieux servis. Si les Européens et les Américains se mettent d'accord sur un standard technique en matière agroalimentaire, alors il y a fort à parier que vos économies, vos producteurs, vos régulateurs n'auront guère d'autre choix que d'accepter de fait ce standard euro-américain. Il y a un bon côté à cela, parce que ça permettra des économies d'échelle à tout le monde. Il y a un moins bon côté, qui est que être obligé d'appliquer un standard, qu'il soit public ou qu'il soit privé d'ailleurs, à la détermination duquel on n'a pas participé, peut être, à juste titre, à mon avis, considéré comme n'étant pas de bonne politique. Cette question est ouverte pour les années à venir et elle est directement liée à ce nouveau phénomène d'expansion des chaînes de valeur auquel le rapport consacre ses développements cette année les plus originaux. Je terminerai ces quelques remarques en insistant sur un point. Le rapport qui vous est présenté aujourd'hui a un énorme avantage, c'est de vous projeter sur l'avenir. Trop souvent, c'est mon expérience, et je peux maintenant le dire librement, trop souvent, on a essayé, dans vos pays, de regarder ce qui avait été fait dans le passé par d'autres. C'est une méthode qui a sa valeur, on apprend toujours de l'expérience. Songez simplement que aucune des grandes évolutions que nous venons d'esquisser n'aurait été pensable ou prévisible il y a 30 ou 40 ans de cela. Le monde de 30 ou 40 ans de cela est un monde très, très ancien. Les évolutions qui se sont faites devant ces 20 ou 30 dernières années vont s'accélérer dans les 20 ou 30 années qui viennent. Et donc, mon plaidoyer final, c'est pour que vous, Africains, vous projetiez définitivement et complètement dans l'avenir. L'avenir, c'est votre chance. Ça n'est plus un passé dont vous devez continuer à vous libérer. Merci pour votre attention.
Mr. Lamy, thank you very much for that very concise delivery you've given. I think takeaways there were, it's no longer business as usual. We need to talk about adding value. Ladies and gentlemen, the president of the bank is leaving us. He had just decided to stay for a while, but thank you very much, President, for staying for the few minutes that you decided. Let's add value. Barriers have been broken, and we need training. We also need to look at the PPPs that are mutually beneficial. Regional integration for easing ways of doing business. Priorities have also changed, he says. Africa can leapfrog when it comes to regional integration and harmonization, and maybe Africans also, he says, should need to look at whether we should be doing business bilaterally or multilaterally. How will Africa's interests be best defended in the absence of this multilateral mechanism that he says prevails? And of course, he ends with a plea that says Africans should be foresighted. Professor Mthuli, sir.
Good afternoon and welcome to the launch of the African Economic Outlook report. This is a very nice report. I urge you all to read it. It's well written. It's about 1,000 pages long. What you see printed is only a third of it. There's a lot more that you could glean from it. What I'm going to do is really present to you the performance of Africa, economic performance of Africa, mention what the drivers are, what the risks are, but also try to answer the question, whose growth is it? My colleagues at UNDP spent a lot of time looking at the human condition, as you can imagine, and in their presentation will say more about the impact on the human condition. And Mario Pezzini from OECD will say a lot more about global value chains and the opportunity they present for sustaining Africa's growth. I hope I can move these slides. If not, I'll speak through. Basically, a pre-crisis, economic crisis, we saw robust growth in Africa. We went through the turbulent crisis, deep crisis phase, and now here we are, almost post-crisis, but not quite post-crisis. I think it's mutating, frankly. So Africa's growth can really be tracked through those three distinct phases, and each year we have an idea as to what's been going on. If you look at North Africa, since the advent of the Arab Spring, has been growing a lot more slowly for obvious reasons, which I need to explain here, dealing with the social cohesion issues that you're all aware of. It slowly but surely is beginning to cover, and we wish the region well. But Sub-Saharan Africa has been growing much more strongly. If you look at the growth, for instance, for 2012, of 4.9%, 5% for 2013, in 2014 and 2015, closer to 6%. That's our expectation for the Sub-Saharan Africa region. So quite clearly, let me call it a twin-track Africa, so to say, north-south, but all resilient growth, I dare say. I mean, compared to the global growth of about 3%, I think you'll agree with me that things are going rather well. Oh, that's behaving all right now. Okay.
There you go.
There we are. So some figures for you to chew over there. But also you can do many things, include South Africa. Now you can include Nigeria, exclude it, do back and forth to see what the impact is. I mean, the bottom line is African growth is showing some resilience. You can also dichotomize between oil importing countries, oil exporting countries. The interesting thing is that even the net oil importers are growing quite fast, and that really speaks to the quality of economic policies that are being pursued by these countries. So growth is not only confined to the oil exporters, but also to the net oil importers as well. I must tell you, we did some numbers, some analysis going back to 1960. I don't know how relevant that is, but econometricians will go to town and try to bang some data and do all manner of things. But what we're finding, though, is that growth is not confined to middle income or high income countries, at least in terms of some kind of African classification. Actually, it is the poorest countries that are showing the strongest growth. They're able to demonstrate that they too can grow, and this is encouraging. It means perhaps that this growth is sustainable, but we know that fundamentally we need to deal with structural transformation, make it more inclusive, take advantage of opportunities such as global value chains to really sustain it so that it impacts on the broader population and creates opportunity for all. Let me press on just a regional distribution of growth. In 2013, you can see North Africa, as I said, 1.9%, Southern Africa, 3%, East Africa at 6.2%, Central Africa 3.7%, West Africa 6.7%. So you can see that the strongest growth in Africa really is East and West. Slower in the middle, slower at the top, slower at the bottom. That's where growth is basically, that's how it is distributed. Going forward, you can see Middle Africa recovering, Central Africa, higher growth in Southern Africa, but the strongest growth is in West Africa, 7.2%, East Africa at 6%, North Africa recovering, they're 3.1%. Some of the fastest growing countries, you can see, I can't read, so I'll read it from here. I see Liberia, Sierra Leone, Chad, Angola, DRC, Congo, Ethiopia, just to mention a few. I'm sure someone will challenge that and say, I know a few other countries that will do just as well, but that's how it's distributed. So it's quite spread out in terms of fastest growing countries, so to say, except for the north of Africa. Some of the slowest growing, and even slow in Africa really means growth of, still above 2.5% with global standards. You can see Morocco, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, Mauritius, Swaziland, to mention a few, Egypt, but still better than the global average. Now, some of the growth drivers, colleagues, you probably have heard this before, but do not underestimate the impact of some of the flows that are flowing into Africa, be it remittances, which, as you know, have overtaken ODA or FDI or portfolio flows. They're the largest flows in Africa is remittances. Those continue to be part of Africa's growth story. But of course, so is ODA is playing a role, so is FDI, just in terms of resource flows into Africa. Again, do not underestimate the impact of domestic demand into Africa. It is driving a good part of Africa's growth. It's not just commodities, but sheer domestic demand or private consumption is part of the story. I'll say a little bit about the African middle class in a moment when I get to it. But also some of the issues we have to be aware of as we try to explain the growth story is the impact of the global economy on Africa, what is so-called the global spillovers. We've done a lot of work in the report looking at what will be the impact of Europe slowdown, US slowdown, China slowdown, BRICS slowdown in many different ways. So we have a fairly good idea. In a way, we've stress tested our focus against all what that could happen globally. And I dare say that we're seeing that the impact of Europe is about 0.24% drop in growth for every 1% drop. So that's probably the zone that's having the biggest impact on African growth in terms of slowdown, and all the other zones are not as strong. You can also go down the column for China only, look at how it is impacting on fragile states, investment companies, type countries rather, and then the factor-driven, oil-driven countries as well. You can look at that. So we've done all the stress tests that we need to do. Just a few more things, ideas about issues around risks to this growth. I've talked about the global issues that we've taken into account. I'm afraid to say that in some of the African countries, we're beginning to see macroeconomic imbalances begin to emerge. Macro policy getting out of line, whether you're looking at inflation levels, budget deficits, current account, and so forth, input cover levels, exchange rate volatility. In some countries, it's beginning to worry us a bit, but we have full confidence in the capacity of the officials to rein in on any fiscal imbalances that need to be taken care of, so as to bring the macro environment under control and then allow growth to go through. I can be specific about countries later, but not just now. But also, colleagues, we have seen a few countries get into the Eurobond market, issue a few bonds. Going forward, of course, we should worry about the impact of QE tapering on the ability to issue these bonds at nice yields. We've got some analysis in terms of the levels at which these issues have been done, and we should be wary that going forward it could get expensive for African countries to issue bonds in the international market. Now, there's one issue that I need to mention is the issue of GDP rebasing. Basically, the size of the African economy at the moment is about $1.52 trillion after the Nigeria's rebasing exercise. And our preliminary numbers are showing that Africa's growth, actually, if all countries were to rebase, it could move up to about $2 trillion US dollars. That's what the numbers are telling us. And so far, only 10 countries in Africa are up to date with their GDP rating. Only 10. And the rest are not. There are some countries that last rebased, I tell you, I've got the list here without naming them. It's incredible. Rebased 20 years ago or something. They're so far behind. And the impact of this exercise of rebasing would be quite dramatic. That's why I think that 30% of GDP in Africa really needs to be, is not being measured properly. A lot is happening, and you see dramatic changes with the rebasing exercise. Let me move slightly faster. I just want to mention a few things about whose growth is this? Is the growth inclusive? What are the inclusive growth issues? Africa's poverty level is currently about 48% in terms of just headcount of those living, at $1.25 a day and below. So 48%, that's what it is. And obviously poverty is higher in states that are considered post-conflict or fragile, depending on your taste of physiology there. We know that. We've also done in this report some kind of the beginnings of some analysis to try to work out where poverty will be in the next 20 years. Whose growth is this? Is it impacting on poverty? And there are some countries that are going to struggle to reduce poverty. We're finding, for instance, a country such as DRC, Congo, is having difficulty, will have difficulties in reducing poverty unless certain steps are done. On the other extreme, Ethiopia, for instance, because again of the policies that are being followed, we will find it easier to reduce poverty. And we see those two countries as examples where outcomes will be different because of policy choices. Again, if I can carry on in terms of whose growth this is, if you do what you call growth incidence, trying to work out where growth is falling when it takes place, it's quite varied. It's not that all the growth in Africa is not inclusive for all countries. For some countries, it is inclusive. For example, we are finding that in Ethiopia, in Burkina Faso, in Lesotho, even in Tunisia, relatively speaking, Gambia, Guinea, growth is slightly more pro-poor, slightly more inclusive. And countries such as Madagascar, Tanzania, Cote d'Ivoire, just to mention a few, not all countries, it is less inclusive compared to the group that I mentioned earlier. So we have an idea as to how this growth is being shared and whose growth this is. We've done also quite a lot of work in trying to understand the African middle class. The idea here is not to tell a big story about the middle class, but it's just try to find out how do people move from extreme poverty to that middle of the pyramid and stay there, and they don't fall back because of a tragedy in the family and so forth, and then they regress back to poverty. What drives it is education, sometimes is governance, it is access to credit so that they can start businesses. It's also urbanization. It drives a lot of what you see in Africa in terms of the growth of middle class. In terms of opportunities, I know my colleague Mario Pezzini will spend a bit of time on global value chains, because this is an opportunity that will allow African countries to sustain the growth through trade, regionally initially, and then globally. But Africa is already there in terms of global value chains, but it's really moving to that higher level of productivity. That is the challenge. And the initial work shows that Southern Africa is the most globally integrated so far, and other regions need to catch up. I mean, in areas such as finance, manufacturing, electric machinery, the transport equipment, and it's least integrated when it comes to agriculture and textiles. So there you are. This is Africa's growth. This is its performance. Here are the risks. And I now hand over to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mthuli Ncube. You raised quite a lot of good points that I think will create a lot of discussion. We're running out of time, tight on time, rather. Not yet out of time, but tight on time. So I won't raise the issues that you raised. I'll bring them in the discussion. So if, sir, if you come, and could you help me with managing the time? I'm pleading.
Distinguished friends, real pleasure to be with you. Despite the short time, I have to start far. It is 13 years that we are working together to produce this report. And as you can imagine, we have produced an history, but also some stories. And I think that to introduce this subject, it's better to go back 3 years when we devoted the African Economic Outlook to youth employment. We noticed at that time that almost 200 million people aged between 15 and 20 years old make Africa as the youngest continent, or if you prefer, the youngest population in the world. We said this was an extraordinary opportunity, but it could become a threat in case in which young people having left in certain cases extreme poverty, and therefore with expectation, the number of children reduced in families, and therefore becoming the children the expectation for the overall family, coming in the labor market and not finding decent jobs, but in the informal economy. This could have created social cohesion issues. Therefore, 2 years ago, we asked ourselves, what is the comparative advantage for Africa? There are many. But if we have to summarize, where to look for jobs? And as it was said before, we saw in Southeast Asia that today has rate of growth of 5.4 this year, whilst Africa 4.8, better than Latin America, that is below 3%, but anyhow not at the rhythm of Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia was capable to use low wages labor force, but also with certain qualification. Africa comparative advantage may be labor force, but it's also natural resources, we said last year. Now, natural resources can be a passport for development under the condition that we are capable to overcome dependence. Many countries that develop thanks to natural resources, whose production increased over time, but what decreased was the dependence from natural resources. And therefore we said, how can we avoid the Dutch disease phenomena that was not born in Africa, as you can hear from the name, and is experimented in many other countries? Well, here comes the issue of this year, and we said we have to address global value chain, because they may represent an opportunity for further diversification. And what is all the story? It was already said by Pascal Lamy. We are confronting a strange phenomena, a kind of trade integration and productive disintegration. Now, in this world, whilst some years ago, 100 years ago, you need a very large roof to produce under this roof all the different pieces that compose a car. Nowadays, you can split the car in 10,000 pieces and produce them in different places, each one specialized in one of the phases of production. These phenomena allow to reduce the barriers to entry in business. You need a smaller capital, and therefore you can start, even if you are a small economy where the internal demand is not that big. Therefore, what is at present the level of this intermediate goods exchange? In other terms, the possibility to specialize just in one product. Well, it's impressive. Most trade is now in intermediate goods, not in final goods. 60% of trade is in this type of product. So there is a possibility to enter without the necessary critical mass of the past. And does it help to develop? Yes, we see that the more an economy is integrated in global value chain, maybe you cannot see in detail that graph, but the more an economy is integrated in global value chain, the higher is the productivity. Why? Because working and specializing in a sector, but be complementary to other activity, yeah, you learn. You sediment competencies over time. You know how to produce manufacturing, how to specialize. You know the condition of a market, the services you need, and the supplier that you may afford. But if this is the case, therefore, how much Africa at present is taking advantage of this global value chain? We have seen that the non-OECD economy have been growing in the production of intermediary goods. 20 years ago, 80% of this production was done in developed countries. Today, only 60%. The rest is done in developing economy. They reach, as a whole, 40% of the production of intermediary goods. But where is Africa in this picture? Well, Africa was capable to increase its production and its participation in the share of the production of intermediary goods. 20 years ago, was producing only 1.4% of the overall production of intermediary goods. Today, has almost doubled, but we remain to percentages that are very low. 2.2% of the overall production of intermediary goods shows that there is more road to make. And where this production is concentrated, mainly in the southern part of Africa, that is, in a certain sense, the hub at present for global value chain production. North Africa is second in terms of value, but sources much less than other regions from other African countries of its export. So if this is the picture, there is a lot of opportunity, but effort to make. And the efforts can go in different directions, because every individual global value chain is different. And also the role that one can play within global value chain is different. Global value chain is not a train that is passing and you have to decide which one you will catch. Global value chain is something that you have to build in order to make the train stop. And here comes the different strategies that need to be put in place. Sometimes, as in the production of cocoa, is the producer that have a lot to say. And in this case, what is paying is to add value added, diversify, innovate the product, add other aspects, for example, the packaging. In other cases, are the wholesalers that are controlling the market, kind of monopsony position. And then, very important, to reduce the chain, at least in distribution, and reach the final market. In Africa, Blue Skies is just an example of who was capable to produce and quickly sell. Why is this crucial, what I'm saying? Because in many cases, we are talking about trade, but think about logistics. It is fundamental in Africa, a continent that is not only, but largely producing commodities, where the price of transport counts a lot, as the value added per kilo is low. It's a country producing fresh goods that you have to deliver fast. It's a continent that is close to the biggest market in the world, but again, this market is asking for just-in-time delivery. Therefore, there are many things to be done. But there are barely two extreme scenarios. The first scenario is to take advantage of what is happening in other emerging countries. Develop growth, produced wealth, but now this wealth was not completely distributed, inequalities grew, and now in China we see growing social conflict and wages. And now there is the research to subcontract elsewhere part of the production, because elsewhere you can find lower wages. This is an interesting, but I would call low-scale strategy. It taps on low wages, and over time may produce good results, but it's not the only scenario. There is a second one, in which the important point is how to permanently upgrade and improve the product via innovation and improving productivity. Here is where we read the importance of the discussion here in the African Union about productive transformation. Yes, it's possible to improve production. It has always been done in OECD countries and in others. Obviously, it requires policy. They are already in place. Brazil, India, Indonesia, South Africa are doing policy to strengthen the comparative advantages and the capacity to compete of their economic structure. It is not a matter of good or bad ideologically. It's a matter to study what is working, understanding what is working, taking what works, and getting aside what doesn't work. That's why we have decided in my organization to create a group of countries that regularly discuss their experiences, from Costa Rica to Malaysia, from Tunisia to Turkey, and obviously there are African countries. Things are already happening. The important point is to draw the crucial lesson to continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. May I now call upon Angela from UNDP, please. Inflation has eaten a little bit in your presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have three key messages. We've heard a lot about global value chains, we've heard a lot about growth, but let's bring it down to what it means for human development. We're saying that human development in Africa is on the rise. Poverty rates are falling, income and education and health outcomes are improving. But the message is that it is too slow, it is uneven, and it's vulnerable to shocks. A few years ago, we were talking very much about the Millennium Development Goals. And one of the things we said that if we were to achieve the goals, then the minimum growth rate to be achieved was at least 7%. We know we're nowhere near that. Some countries are doing better than others, but on the whole, a lot more needs to be done. We're talking about uneven development. It's not just between countries, it's even within countries, it's within communities, and this is creating a problem. We're also saying that our human development is vulnerable to shocks. We've seen a lot of progress, but as soon as we get an economic shock, an environmental shock, a political shock, we move very many steps behind. So clearly this is something that we need to pay attention to. Going forward, in the report, we've evaluated the 4 key things that need to be on Africa's development agenda for the future. And we're happy that this is already part of Agenda 2063 and is part of the ongoing discussion post-2015. These are inclusion, gender equality, youth empowerment, and environmental sustainability. Finally, we looked at the issue of value chain development. It can improve or it can hamper sustainable human development. Okay, that is a little bit small. However, the key message here is that you want to be in the top right quadrant of this graph, because this graph is looking at what is the change in your income dimension of your Human Development Index on the vertical, and on the horizontal, what is your change in your non-income components of the Human Development Index. So there are some countries that are doing both. They're growing both in the non-income components and as well as their income components. And there are some countries that, although they're improving, getting higher incomes, they're not able to attain their social objectives. This is health or education outcomes. And then on the right bottom hand corner, we have countries that, although they're not doing as well as other countries are doing with regard to their income, they're actually able to meet some of their health and education objectives. So there is hope that given stronger economic growth, these countries will actually do much better. Why are we talking about exclusion? Because we're saying that unequal access to education and barriers to the labor market are excluding young people. So they're not able to participate in the growth that is actually taking place. They're not able to get those jobs in the productive sectors. So they're not able to pull themselves out of poverty. We're also saying that a lot has been done with regard to gender equality. We've had a lot of progress. It's very good that 1 in 5 parliamentarians in Africa is a woman, and we're actually in a country which is doing much better than that. But we also know that there are other countries that are not doing as well. But the most important thing is that although we're making gains in certain indicators, we have not yet translated this into the sharp reversal of the long-standing inequalities between women and men in access to resources and control over these resources. So that's why we think that it's paramount to address this issue. And then also the issue of environmental sustainability. Most of our economies are based on natural resources, whether we're talking about natural resource extraction, whether we're talking about energy, agriculture, fishing. This is key for the future of our continent. So whenever we're looking at our strategies going forward, we really need to choose and prioritize development strategies that will also take into account environmental challenges. And then also the last point about energy access, I think has already been covered a lot in the discussion about infrastructure. Now, how can value chains improve human development? One of the key things that we find is that by integrating into value chains, poor and marginalized communities are able to get access to technology and innovation. And this is very helpful in strengthening their bargaining positions so that they're able to gain more from integration in value chains. We also focus very much on agricultural value chains because we believe that these contribute to social transformation and community resilience. Why is this? Well, because if you are integrated in value chains in diversified agricultural commodities, then you're able to reduce your vulnerability. If one commodity goes south, at least you have expectations for benefiting from other commodities. You're also able to raise your agricultural productivity and multiply livelihood opportunities. And then a final point in this area is that we don't often think about value chains in the context of post-conflict environments. And we think that the jobs that you can create through value chains can help to promote access to productive activities and promote social cohesion, especially in countries that are recovering from recent and long-standing conflict. And we have examples of how that has helped. On the other hand, we believe that global value chains can also harm human development. This is because as small producers and poor and women producers participate in value chains, then they expose themselves to higher levels of risk. As was mentioned by my colleague, there's multinational corporations are now solidifying and concentrating a lot of the power when it comes to supply-driven value chains, which means that poor, marginalized farmers do not have as much control in the bargaining and being able to control prices, and this will be detrimental to their participation in the value chains. And this also comes very much because of the issue of power and control over resources. So what we're saying is that the manner in which integration in value chains is carried out and the capacities of the various actors can either help to create wealth and improve livelihoods, or it can lead to deprivation and exclusion. So there are roles for the government and the private sector and cooperatives to maximize the benefits and reduce the risks related to value chains. So finally, how do we maximize the benefits of global value chains for the poor? The first area is about economic and social infrastructure. We talk a lot about roads, bridges, ports, but we don't talk enough about the social infrastructure that goes along with building the skills that are required for people to effectively participate in global value chains. The good news is that we are already focusing on health and education, and right now we need to look at how we can deepen the social safety nets that will allow poor and marginalized groups to engage in global value chains. We're also talking about how private sector actors can promote collective action. There's an issue about power and control over resources, so there's definitely room for poor and small-scale producers and suppliers to have collective action in order to improve their capacity to engage. And then finally, let me talk about building the resilience and streamlining regional trade to increase the benefits of value chains. Why are we talking about building resilience? As you integrate in global value chains, you get involved in a lot of risky situations, there are changing circumstances, and you become vulnerable to a lot of changes in the export markets. But by developing stronger financial markets, improving access to financial services, then smaller suppliers are able to take these hits. They're able to absorb the impact of these changes in the circumstances and be able to continue participating in the global value chains. This is what we talk about when we say export resilience. And then finally, streamlining regional trade procedures. We know a lot about regional integration. We've been talking a lot about regional integration, but there are also the issue about non-trade barriers. There are issues that have been talked about long delays in the borders, the issues we have about being able to cross borders within Africa. So these are some of the issues that we really need to take into account if we want to have the maximum benefit from global value chains. Thank you.
Angela, thank you very much for those salient points that you've brought out. And that's really where we come to the end of the presentations. And we only have one person that hasn't spoken. So I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm going to have to put your head on the block and start asking you a question. What I must say is we don't have much time. So I'll just ask this question to Madam Rugwabiza, and then I'll come to the floor. So if you have any issues you need to raise that you have heard from here, please, let's get ready. We've heard a lot of things, Madam. Now, my understanding is I'm going to ask you a question, right? No, you're not presenting, right?
No.
No, okay, just checking. Just checking. We've heard a lot of things, a lot of comments. Mr. Lamy says Africans must be foresighted. Angela says, oh, you're forgetting the most important thing here. It's the human beings. We've got to look at health. We've got to look at education. I agree with him. Professor Ncube says well, you know, some countries are doing it, some poor countries are doing it, and I wanted to argue with him and say, well, you know, if you start at ground zero, anything upwards is progress. we could look at that. Progress. And Mr. Pezzini also says that something is happening. Do you agree with all you have heard today?
They are all right. And this is not a diplomatic statement.
Okay, we can all go home.
Non, Daniel, merci. Prenant la parole comme gouvernement officiel du gouvernement, je voudrais vraiment tous vous souhaiter une très chaleureuse bienvenue. Très chaleureuse bienvenue à Kigali. Quand je dis qu'ils ont tous raison, le président de la banque, Kaberuka, a commencé en disant, en réalité, nous avons aujourd'hui suffisamment de matériaux pour savoir ce qui impacte les chaînes de valeur, ce qui doit être fait. Et il faudrait peut-être ce qui serait en addition de ce diagnostic, c'est de savoir comment ça se fait et où est-ce que ça se fait, où est-ce que ça a pu se faire et comment ça a pu se faire. L'avènement des chaînes de valeur, je pense qu'il est important de le dire, n'est pas nouveau. C'est son importance qui est devenue, qui est un élément à noter, qui est très important. Et son importance elle-même a changé l'importance que l'on accorde aujourd'hui à l'environnement politique. L'environnement politique des affaires, l'environnement politique des échanges. Et sur l'environnement politique des échanges, de manière très simple, Daniel, je pense que plus que jamais, avec les chaînes de valeur ajoutées, plus que jamais, avec les chaînes de valeur, le temps. Le temps est devenu un facteur compétitif beaucoup plus important qu'auparavant. Mais également la simplicité. Et dans le temps, je vais donner un simple exemple, c'est qu'aujourd'hui, dans le temps, en matière de réduction de temps, au courant des quelques mois qui viennent de passer, dans le contexte de l'intégration dans le corridor du Nord, en matière de temps, il y a des choses qui sont frappantes, qui sont en train de se passer sur le continent. En matière de temps, eh bien, aujourd'hui, le nombre de jours que prend simplement un camion de passage de Mombasa à Kampala est passé de 18 à 4. Cela vous donne l'impact sur la compétitivité. L'impact dont on parle, si aujourd'hui on sait que les imports participent à 40% des exports, donc l'impact sur la compétitivité des entreprises qui vont exporter à partir de Kampala. Ce délai de temps est passé de 22 à 6 jours de Mombasa à Kigali. Alors, regardez non seulement l'impact de temps, mais aussi sur les coûts. Et ça amène à un deuxième élément. L'élément du coût. Le temps, le coût est devenu un élément central. Avec les valeurs ajoutées, un élément central. Il était déjà un élément important de compétitivité. Il est devenu un élément encore plus central. Un troisième élément, c'est l'élément de la simplicité. Comment ça a pu se faire? C'est un changement radical. En réalité, comment ça a pu se faire? Eh bien, ça a pu se faire en éliminant complètement tous les stops qui intervenaient entre Mombasa et Kampala. C'est lourd, mais ça veut dire qu'en réalité, les bénéfices qui sont à la clé sont des bénéfices absolument impressionnants. Un quatrième élément, et je suis d'accord avec tous mes collègues ici, c'est l'élément des ressources humaines.
I'll stop you on the fourth point, Madam.
Yeah.
I just want us to interact. So because I'll come back to you. I just want to ask you, Professor Mthuli Ncube, Madam Rugwabiza says that there's nothing new here, and I kind of agree with her. We've been in conferences listening to this. There's a report every year. We get to hear same old, same old. But you brought a point where you said there's some countries that are showing this growth, and I think your worry was that is it going to be sustainable? Maybe I should ask you, do you think it's going to be sustainable in this east-west growth that we are seeing, and what is it that they are doing right that probably we can start to learn from? Because otherwise, we keep harping, I think, Prof.
It all starts with policy leadership. It is the right policy leadership that will deliver the sustainability of this growth, and in many different areas. For example, it's about realizing that you need to build people's skills so they can, access those jobs. We've already talked about that. It's about making sure that the companies are able to access regional markets, either through investing in infrastructure or other ways. It's the whole story of structural transformation is at the core of this. For those that are producing natural resources.
I just want to come in because I hear this a lot, and I think we need to talk practicalities. Africa generally, from Ghana downwards, we are almost all 50 years old as far as the shackles of bondage are concerned. We still need to learn, our governments still need to learn about these points you're making?
Absolutely, you'll be surprised. There's one country, you have almost mentioned it. I talked about macroeconomic imbalances beginning to re-emerge. It's as if we haven't learned anything about macroeconomic managers. So we have to keep going at this. This is a marathon. It's not a short sprint. So we have keep going with the argument, keep re-emphasizing it. And the positions of countries keep changing. We have to make sure that we stay at the top.
We need to stay at the top. Is there any comments from the floor? Do we have roving mics that people can use? Any comments? Okay. Yeah, I think we'll need mic. I might not hear the clapping all the time.
My name is Fesation. I'm a professor. And trying to find ways and means of resource mobilization for African Union. First, the issue of capacity in Africa. Many African countries lack the capacity not only from policy making, but also implementation. So the issue is, are we in a position to compete?
Yes.
I cannot compete with the best racetrack, or in other words, at the racetrack. So it means that the developed countries and African countries are no way to compete. I mean, there's no way for many African countries to compete with industrialized countries. Second, the issue of technology. In order to promote trade, you need to boost production. In order to boost production, you have to also have technology and other facilities. These are manifestly absent in Africa. Mineral and oil resources. Africa is rich in mineral and oil resources. And yet, I mean, we are exporting crude oil and then importing refined oil. There is serious paradox. Harmonization, you mentioned.
Last point, please. Yeah. Mr. Lamy, you spoke about foresight, which really I caught on. And the points that the professor is raising are very important. He's saying that we talk of competitiveness, but can I really compete when I don't have the tools? Can you?
I respect professors very much, but not what I heard. If you were right, Africa would not be where it is.
You disagree with the professor?
These elements are there, but in many cases, countries, governments, business, the people are coping with that in a way that adds value and that creates growth and that triggers entrepreneurship. We all know these problems are there, but little by little, they are being solved. So there's nothing like, in my view, and that the experience for the last, let's say, 15 years, and I spent quite a bit of time in this continent, there's nothing like a sort of fate which would weigh on African shoulders. On the contrary, I think what we've seen during the 5 to 10 years is precisely the formidable capacity to overcome a number of these obstacles.
Angela, you agree? Because your delivery sounded like you agreed with the professor.
No, actually, I don't agree with one small point. Because I don't think it's when you have a blanket statement like that, then you ignore a lot of the positive things that are already happening on the continent. We have a growing number of youthful entrepreneurs who are breaking the barriers and using whatever is available to them to really come to the stage where they need to come to government and say, help us remove the barriers so that we can grow and go beyond what we're doing. Also, within countries, there are pockets. We have, as much as we're saying that agriculture is not productive, there are some commodities within countries where they are using advanced technology, they're able to export, they're able to enter, participate in these global value chains. So I don't think it's a blanket statement. I think we should be looking at how can we learn from these experiences, how can we help them to remove the barriers so that they grow bigger, and how can we even promote South-South cooperation so that we can bring countries together, we can learn from these experiences, and we can really have locally adapted technology.
Thank you very much. Sounds like, Prof, you didn't have much support here, but I do support you. I think we can't continue talking about the same thing over and over again. But, sir.
Good afternoon. Gregory Cronston, FBN Capital. Just a question on regional integration. Everyone's talking about it. It's a big subject, we all know. But how far should it go? Customs union, monetary union? And is there some model out there? And please don't say the EU. Thank you.
Mr. Pezzini, I think you raised the issue of integration, if I'm not mistaken. How far do you go with this thing? We continue to integrate?
In the round table, better you asking.
But I think you raised it. That's why I'm coming to you.
Yeah, everybody is raising. I don't know why you have this allergy for the European Union. Anyhow, it's a lot of things, regional integration. It's obviously trade and barriers. It's also implementation of policies. How many meetings took place in the experience of regional integration where public officials exchanged to each other what they were doing? How do you do HCCT, a cash conditional transfer, in practical terms? It's true, I totally agree with you. When you look at the theory of governance, it's just wishful thinking. The real place where you apply the policies, the way in which you do it, is crucial. And you cannot learn from a textbook. There's an additional reason why you need regional integration, or at least policy dialogue, places in which people share their experiences. Sometimes we are unconscious of the fact that we have done it.
I think the point is not we don't need regional integration, it's just how far do you go? Otherwise, you continue mutating.
I want to stress the qualitative aspect of regional integration and not just the aspects that are related to trade barriers and so on. Let me add another factor here that everybody has stressed as well, the importance of logistics and transports. That's needed, that's absolutely indispensable, needs to be done by regional integration. A plan of infrastructure that goes in this direction is absolutely indispensable.
Thank you very much.
Because, just let me add one point. Let's measure how much transport affects the final cost in respect of trade barrier. They still are very high.
Thank you very much. Is there, I see a lot of male hands up. Could we have ladies too? Lest I'm accused of not being gender sensitive. Okay, are there ladies? If they are not, they aren't, I'm going to go with the gentleman. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Shegun, I'm Nigerian. I wanted to talk about, I see a lot of talk about growth and focus on the economic outlook. But what are we doing about the things that we need to do to contain things that could cause regression in economic outlook? Things like the breakout of the Ebola virus in Mali, for example. No matter how much economic growth you have, once that type of stuff hits your country, then everything goes to regression. So what's been done about that? And I haven't heard anything being said about that.
Yeah, what's being done about that? I see Professor Mthuli wants to talk, but I wanted, Madam Rugwabiza, you want to make a comment on that?
Well, absolutely. Thank you. I also wanted to make a comment on the issue of regional integration. How far should we go? In terms of regional integration, I think we should just take a very pragmatic approach. I didn't mention the cost element, but it's clearly, if it was an option a few decades ago, today it is an absolute must. The numbers I mentioned in terms of just reducing the time, well, you will be interested to know that what it means in terms of just the cost is cutting down the cost by $1,600 per container. So that's huge in terms of just the impact on the competitiveness of the economies. Now, clearly, when it comes to regulatory issues, those are becoming much more difficult. Are we going to agree on exactly the same standards? Here, I think we should take a more pragmatic approach. In terms of regulatory issues, if we can't harmonize, at least we should be able to have mutual recognition so that we will really facilitate the movement. And this is happening. This is happening. It is one element that Professor Mthuli said, it's really most and foremost, it's a matter of really political will. Political will just to put in action and having in place, making sure, the monitoring, making sure that is happening. What has happened in the Northern Corridor within a year is a testimony to that. Now, in terms of what should we do, I don't think that we can afford to compartmentalize policies. Economic growth is important, but it is serving in a context. We are not saying here that you should focus exclusively and solely on economic growth. Economic growth will happen only if you have a population that is in good health. And that was pretty clear, at least when it comes to Rwanda, it was clear that is an element we focused on by providing the universal health coverage, and a number of other countries are taking this approach. So I don't think we can it's not a neither or. It needs to be done in an integrated manner. Otherwise, all what we are saying about economic growth won't be sustainable. Thank you.
Okay, Prof. You
mentioned the important point about that we're silent on things like Ebola and so forth. To tell you the truth, the biggest driver of economic regression is not things like Ebola and so forth. It's just temporary. It's actually the outbreak of conflict. Conflict is the biggest driver of growth regression in Africa. When a country goes into full-scale conflict, it typically takes at least 15 years to recover. We've done a lot of work on this. As Kaberuka said, we have no shortage of analysis. We've done a lot of that. It's pretty devastating. And we understand that what drives a lot of this conflict, in fact, we're launching a report tomorrow, which President Begg is going to help lead in Obasanjo, on dealing with post-conflict Africa and make sure that we can create more peace. It's quite clear that social exclusion is at the core of conflict in Africa. These regional disparities within the same country, people feeling excluded, the capture of power by the elite and the benefits thereof, all those, not sharing the natural resource revenues fairly, that will drive conflict. So conflict is the biggest threat to economic growth in Africa, in our view.
As a matter of fact, if I may just follow up on that, Professor, is it not that the bank was actually about to disburse some money when the conflict in South Sudan happened and the money was withheld? And again, I mean, things that could probably have helped the situation there, from what I understood anyway.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We're always surprised by how quickly it happens,
That's true. Sir, I'll come to you. I've seen a lady here, but I don't know, is there a mic here? If you could put a point across, maybe the panelists you're directing to, short, succinct, to the point.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Amata Diabate. I'm from Mali. And by the way, there was no Ebola outbreak in Mali. It was in Guinea. Thank you very much. But I wanted to address a question to Professor Ncube, who talks about the issue of upgrading poor people to a decent livelihood level and then not see them fall back into poverty. This is an issue. Many countries work hard toward alleviating poverty, having lower percentage of people trying to meet the MDG goals of poverty alleviation, but then given some external shocks some of those people fall back. So it's really about sustaining that graduation. What do you think, what exactly can countries do to assure that? Because we know Dr. Rugwabiza said about the political will. And we know that in Africa, we don't have that political will everywhere. And we can ensure that we have it. One of the issues about the Sustainable Development Goals is about the governance issue.
Madam, I think we got the point there. How do we sustain it? Once we have reached a certain level, Prof, how then do we stay there?
Two quick things. One is social protection. I think there's a lot to learn from Brazil, a lot to learn from South Africa and other parts of our social protection is critical for making sure people don't fall back into poverty, and you have to do it right. It has to be conditional transfers, for instance. It has to be productive social protection that stimulates productivity. We have a wonderful program here in Rwanda called the Kirinka program, the one cow poor family program. It's working wonders, in my view. Maybe others disagree. So that's one way. Of course, jobs are the ultimate key. If you have a job, you protect yourself against most things, including poverty. And but we have to create the jobs. Thank you.
Okay, you wanted to add, Mr. President?
I would like to add just one point to this question that I found crucial. Because one thing is the conditional cash transfer, they help leave extreme poverty. But then not only if you have external shock, but somebody in the family got sick, you fall down. Yeah. You are in informal economy, you get to retirement, you don't have a pension because you were in the formal economy. So there are several factors that strengthen further the importance of social protection system. And I agree with Mthuli, it would be important to study certain cases. Brazil is one, Brazil for sure did a lot of things in this field. There are others, and see what are the methods and the mechanisms that function at the best. However, let me also tell you that Brazil, not by chance, is a country where the fiscal revenue out of GDP is 32, 33, 35%. The average in OECD countries is 35, 37%. Many countries, including in Africa, have a fiscal revenue which is below 15% of GDP. So between 32 of Brazil and 15, there is a wide difference, which means that very often the public sector doesn't have the capacity to put in place this policy unless at the same time a fiscal reform is put in place.
Thank you very much. A question from the gentleman there, sir. Yes. Short to the point, and because we are tight on time.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Tope. I'm from Nigeria as well. I just want to hark back and emphasize what Professor Pezzini said. It's all about jobs. But I want us to understand the sheer impossibility, for example, of creating 100,000 jobs these days. Dr. Rugwabiza talked about the lead time between Mombasa Port and Kigali, having dropped from 24 days to about 6 or 4 days now. And the real issue is that we need to re-engage with innovation, with technology, with globalization, and the inevitability of these concepts to realize the fact that these days, in spite of the ballooning population, especially among the youth, the truth is that human beings are, to a large extent, not as relevant as we used to be in the supply chain. And that creates a huge problem for us in Africa. Therefore, what we need is a serious structural transformation in terms of the way we think, because, of course, the world itself has really transformed from the way it was 20, 30 years ago. These days, technology does a whole lot more, and innovation and globalization reaches out and gets the job from us in Africa. So any government official that says 100,000 jobs is going to create it, it's a tall order. It probably will never happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, that's where we have to leave it for today because we have run out of time. And I was already beginning. Why do we have to warm up? We must just get into it. This warming up thing, and then we lose time. I would like to thank the panelists here, Mr. Pascal Lamy, Professor Ncube, Angela Lesigi, Mr. Pezzini, and of course, let's not forget to hold the discussion about the launch of this. And Professor Mthuli, do you want to do the honors?
The African Economic Outlook is duly launched. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So where is that?
I have to keep holding it.
Hold it on. All right. Thank you very much for being such a good audience, and to the panelists. Sir, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it. Madam, thank you. Prof, thank you. Appreciate it. Sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam, ça va?
Hata watu wakuseme songa